The alarm rang across the bridge of the warship. Captain Jake Morrison stood up from his chair and looked at the bright screens in front of him. His crew worked fast at their stations. Something was wrong. The communication officer, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, turned to face him. Her face showed worry. A signal came through 3 hours ago. It was a distress call. Someone needed help badly. The message used many different radio frequencies. It was written in Galactic Standard Language, but the words were broken and hard to understand. Amy had been working to decode the full message since it arrived. Amy walked to Jake and gave him a small tablet. Her eyes were serious. Jake took the device and started reading. The message was from the Valon Republic. These were peaceful aliens who lived in the outer spiral region of the galaxy. They ran trading stations and helped many species do business together. The message said their worlds were under attack. A military empire called the Krath Dominion was bombing their planets from space. The Krath wanted to take over Valon territory. When the Valon said no, the Krath started killing innocent people. The message said millions were already dead. Jake felt anger rise in his chest. The Valon were good people. They were the first aliens to meet humans when Earth joined the galactic community 20 years ago. Back then, many alien species were afraid of humans. They heard stories about Earth being a death world. They thought humans were dangerous, but the Valon were different. They welcomed humans with open arms. They taught humans about galactic customs and laws. They helped human traders find new markets. They treated humans as equals when others treated them like savages. Now those same kind aliens needed help. Commander Daniel Carter stood at the tactical station. He was a tall man with short gray hair. He looked at Jake and spoke in a low voice. The Valon system was 3 weeks away, even at the fastest speed their ships could travel. By the time they arrived, the battle might be over. The Valon might all be dead. Jake understood the problem. Time was not on their side. But he also knew humans had advantages. Earth was a Class 12 death world. This meant it was one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy that still had intelligent life. Most aliens came from safe, peaceful worlds. They never had to fight predators or survive harsh weather. Earth was different. Humans evolved by fighting for survival every single day. They fought lions and bears. They survived ice ages and terrible storms. They learned to be tough and strong. They could run for hours without stopping. They could heal from injuries that would kill other species. Most importantly, humans understood violence in a way most aliens did not. The galaxy called humans Deathworlders. Some species said this with fear. Others said it with respect. But everyone knew that humans were fighters. Human soldiers were legendary. Human warships were built thick and strong. Human weapons hit hard and fast. Jake made his decision quickly. He told Amy to connect him to Fleet Command on Earth. He also told her to start planning the jump to Valon space. The crew should prepare for combat. Every department needed to be ready. Amy worked her controls with quick fingers. A few minutes later, the face of Admiral Patricia Brooks appeared on the main screen. The Admiral was an older woman with silver hair. She looked tired but alert. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent. Jake told the Admiral about the Valon distress call. He asked for permission to respond to their plea for help. The Admiral listened carefully. When Jake finished speaking, she nodded slowly. She understood what was at stake. The Valon were allies. They were friends. Humans did not abandon their friends. Admiral Brooks told Jake he would not go alone. She was putting together a battle group. 4 heavy cruiser ships would go to Valon space. The Valiant Dawn was one of them. The others were the Iron Hammer, the Storm Chaser, and the Silent Fury. Together, these 4 ships carried 2,000 crew members. They had enough firepower to fight a small war. 4 ships might not sound like many, but human ships were built differently than alien ships. They had thicker armor that could take more damage. They had bigger guns that fired solid metal slugs instead of energy beams. They had missile systems that could overwhelm enemy defenses. Most importantly, they had human crews who never gave up. The Admiral told Jake the fleet would meet at Rally Point Echo in 6 hours. This was a meeting spot far from any planets. From there, they would jump together to Valon space. The trip would take 3 weeks. Jake needed to make sure his ship and crew were completely ready. Jake thanked the Admiral and ended the call. He turned to his crew. Everyone on the bridge was listening. They all knew what was coming. A real battle was ahead. People might die, but they also knew why they were going. The Valon needed help. That was enough reason. Jake started giving orders. The engineering team needed to check every system on the ship. The weapons team needed to load all missile tubes and charge all railguns. The medical bay needed to prepare for wounded. The Marines needed to ready their armor and weapons. Every person had a job to do. Jake left the bridge and walked through the corridors of his ship. He wanted to see his crew and talk to them. In the armory, Sergeant Kevin Hayes was working with his Marines. Kevin was a huge man with muscles like steel. His arms had scars from many battles. He was checking weapons and armor with careful attention. When Jake entered, the Marines stopped and stood at attention. Jake told them to relax. He asked Kevin if they were ready. The sergeant smiled and said his Marines were always ready. They would show the Krath what human soldiers could do. Jake believed him. Kevin had never let him down. In the medical bay, Dr. Lisa Bennett was organizing supplies. Lisa was young but experienced. She had served in 3 wars before joining the Valiant Dawn. Her hands were steady and her mind was sharp. She knew how to save lives under pressure. Jake asked if she was ready for casualties. Lisa looked at him with serious eyes. She said she hoped there would not be many wounded. But her medical bay was prepared for anything. She had enough supplies to treat hundreds of injuries. Her team was trained and ready. In the engineering section, Chief Marcus Cole was running tests on the jump drive. Marcus was a genius with machines. He could fix anything and make engines work better than they were designed to. He loved his job and he loved the Valiant Dawn like it was his own child. Jake asked Marcus if the ship was ready to jump. Marcus grinned and wiped grease from his hands. He said the Valiant Dawn could jump to the other side of the galaxy if needed. Every system was running perfectly. The ship would not let them down. Jake felt proud of his crew. They were the best people he had ever worked with. They were skilled and brave. They trusted each other. They would face whatever came together. 6 hours passed quickly. The Valiant Dawn left its patrol route and headed to Rally Point Echo. The journey to help the Valon was about to begin. The Valiant Dawn arrived at Rally Point Echo exactly on time. Jake stood on the bridge watching the view screens. 3 other human warships appeared one after another. Each ship jumped out of faster-than-light travel and took position in formation. The sight made Jake feel strong. 4 powerful ships working together could accomplish great things. The Iron Hammer was commanded by Captain Victor Grant. Victor was a tough veteran who fought in many border wars. He had scars on his face and hands. His reputation was well known throughout the fleet. When Victor Grant attacked, he attacked with everything he had. Enemies feared him. The Storm Chaser belonged to Captain Rachel Kim. Rachel was the youngest captain in the entire fleet. She was only 35 years old, but age did not matter. Rachel was brilliant at strategy and tactics. She could see patterns in battle that others missed. Her crew loved working for her. The Silent Fury was under Captain Alex Turner. Alex used to work in intelligence before becoming a ship captain. He knew how to gather information and use surprise. His ship specialized in stealth attacks and electronic warfare. Enemy ships never knew what hit them when Alex struck. Amy opened a communication channel that connected all 4 ships. The main view screen split into 4 sections. Jake could see the faces of his 3 fellow captains. They all looked determined and ready. This was a good team. Jake spoke first.
He told them about the mission.
The Valon Republic was under attack by the Krath Dominion. The Valon were peaceful traders who helped humanity when humans first entered galactic space. Now they needed help desperately. Millions were already dead. More would die if the fleet did not hurry. Victor leaned forward in his chair. His scarred face looked intense. He asked about the enemy forces. How many Krath ships were there? What weapons did they use? What was their battle strategy? These were good questions. Jake had studied all available intelligence. Jake explained what they knew. The distress signal said about 15 Krath ships were blockading the Valon homeworld. The Krath were using orbital bombardment. They fired energy weapons from space down onto cities and towns. The goal was to force the Valon to surrender through fear and destruction. There was no reliable information about Krath ship capabilities, but intelligence reports suggested they relied heavily on energy shields and beam weapons. This was standard doctrine for most galactic military forces. Ships would stay far apart and shoot energy beams at each other until one side's shields failed. Rachel tapped her control panel and looked thoughtful. She said this was typical galactic warfare. Most alien species fought battles at long range. They expected human ships to do the same thing. This gave the human fleet an advantage. The Krath would not be ready for human tactics. Alex smiled in a cold way. He said the Krath were going to get a nasty surprise. Human ships did not fight like other ships. Humans preferred to get close and hit hard. Alex was right. Human weapons were designed for medium-range combat, not long-range beam exchanges. Jake outlined the battle plan. The 4 ships would jump into Valon space together. They would arrive close to the planet, not at the edge of the system. This would surprise the Krath fleet. Before the enemy could react, the human ships would launch massive missile strikes. The missiles would overwhelm the Krath point defense systems. After the missiles hit, the human ships would close to medium range. Then they would use their railguns. Railguns fired solid metal slugs using powerful magnets. The slugs traveled at tremendous speeds. They could punch through shields and armor better than energy beams. Most alien ships were not designed to handle kinetic weapons. The primary target would be the Krath flagship. Intelligence said the Krath used centralized command. One ship controlled the entire fleet. If the flagship was destroyed, the other ships would be confused and disorganized. Victor and Jake would focus on the flagship. Rachel and Alex would handle the escort ships. All 4 captains agreed to the plan. They synchronized their navigation computers. The jump to Valon space would take 3 weeks. During that time, they would drill their crews constantly. Every person needed to know their job perfectly. There would be no time for mistakes in battle. The journey through jump space was strange and boring at the same time. When ships traveled faster than light, they entered a different dimension. Colors swirled outside the windows. Time felt different. There was nothing to do except wait and prepare. Jake spent his days running combat simulations with his crew. Daniel Carter set up different battle scenarios. The crew practiced responding to enemy attacks. They practiced coordinating with the other ships. They practiced emergency procedures. Everyone got better and faster with each drill. On day 7, Jake called a meeting with his senior officers. They gathered in the briefing room around a large table. Daniel had prepared detailed information about Krath ship designs. He showed holographic images that floated above the table. The Krath preferred large capital ships. Their vessels were built around heavy energy weapon systems. The ships had excellent shields that could absorb lots of energy damage. But their armor was relatively thin. They did not expect enemies to get close enough to use physical weapons. This was a critical weakness Amy asked about Krath point defense. These were small weapons designed to shoot down incoming missiles and fighters. Daniel said Krath point defense was optimized for stopping energy weapons and light projectiles. Human missiles were bigger and faster. A coordinated missile strike from 4 ships would overwhelm their defenses. Jake asked about Krath command structure. How did they organize their fleet? Who made decisions? Daniel explained that Krath military culture was highly centralized. One admiral on the flagship gave all orders. The other ships just followed commands. There was little initiative or independent thinking. This was very different from human military doctrine. Human captains were trained to think for themselves. If communication was lost, each ship could still fight effectively. Human crews were encouraged to adapt and improvise. Flexibility was a strength. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Every officer contributed ideas and suggestions. By the end, they had refined the battle plan. Everyone knew their role. Everyone understood the strategy. Jake felt confident his crew was ready. As days passed, Jake sometimes went to the observation lounge. This was a room with large windows that looked out into jump space. The colors were beautiful but strange. Red and blue and green swirled together. Jake found it relaxing to watch. Amy found him there one evening. She brought 2 cups of coffee and sat down beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Amy spoke. She asked Jake what he was thinking about. Jake said he was thinking about why humans fought. The galaxy saw humans as warriors and Deathworlders. Some species were afraid of human violence. Jake wondered if that was all humans would ever be to other species. Just scary fighters. Amy sipped her coffee and thought about this. She said that maybe some species would always be afraid. But the Valon were different. The Valon saw humans as friends and allies. They saw human strength as something protective, not threatening. That was what mattered most. Jake smiled at this. Amy was right. Humans were not just warriors. They were protectors. They used their strength to defend those who could not defend themselves. That was honorable. That gave their violence purpose and meaning. Down in the Marine quarters, Sergeant Kevin was training his troops. The Marines practiced close combat techniques. They moved through drills wearing full armor. Despite the heavy equipment, they moved quickly and smoothly. Years of training showed in every movement. Kevin called a break and gathered his Marines. He wanted to talk to them about something important. Most aliens had never experienced real violence. They evolved on safe worlds with few predators. They did not understand combat the way humans did. This gave Marines an advantage, but it also created responsibility. Kevin told his troops they were not trying to terrify anyone. They were going to save the Valon. Yes, they would be fierce in battle. Yes, they would fight with all their strength. But they needed to remember they were liberators, not conquerors. The Valon needed to see humans as heroes, not monsters. The Marines listened carefully. They understood. Being strong was not enough. They had to show that human strength came with human compassion. That was what made them different from the Krath. The 3 weeks of travel finally came to an end. The day of battle was arriving. On day 21, the 4 human warships dropped out of jump space. They appeared at the edge of the Valon system. Immediately, the tactical displays lit up with contacts. 15 Krath ships were in orbit around the Valon homeworld. The displays showed active weapons fire directed at the planet's surface. Daniel reported the situation quickly. 15 enemy vessels confirmed. They were in high orbit over Valon Prime. Sensors detected energy weapons firing downward. The Krath were bombing cities from space. Innocent people were dying while the fleet watched. Jake felt anger burn in his chest. Those bastards were killing helpless civilians. The Krath had no honor. They thought they could terrorize peaceful people into surrender. They were about to learn a hard lesson. Humans protected their friends. Jake asked for fleet status. Amy checked her console and reported that all 4 ships were ready for combat. Captain Victor was requesting permission to engage the enemy. The Iron Hammer was eager to fight. Jake understood the feeling. It was time to strike. Jake opened the fleet communication channel. He spoke clearly so all 4 captains could hear. All ships would execute attack pattern Delta. The primary target was the Krath flagship, designated Tango 1. It was time to show these invaders what happened when they threatened human allies. The 4 human warships accelerated toward the planet. Their engines burned bright against the darkness of space. They moved in perfect formation. On the Krath flagship, Admiral Kreth was watching his bombardment proceed. The Valon cities were burning nicely. Soon they would beg for mercy. Suddenly, his tactical officer spoke up. The officer was a nervous creature with blue-scaled skin. 4 unknown vessels had just appeared on sensors. They were not in the Krath database. The ships were accelerating rapidly toward the Krath fleet position. Kreth waved his clawed hand dismissively. These were probably foolish merchants who thought they could make demands. Perhaps local defense forces trying to look brave. Either way, they were no threat. He ordered his crew to power up shields. They would fire a warning shot. These intruders would learn not to interfere with Krath Dominion business. The Krath were completely unprepared for what happened next. The human fleet split into 2 groups as planned. The Valiant Dawn and Iron Hammer targeted the flagship directly. The Storm Chaser and Silent Fury moved to engage the escort vessels. Everything happened with precise coordination. Daniel announced that missile locks were acquired on the flagship. Jake gave the order to fire. Dozens of missiles erupted from the Valiant Dawn launch tubes. They streaked across space like angry hornets. At the same time, the Iron Hammer fired its own missile salvo. The combined barrage was massive. On the Krath flagship, alarms started screaming. The tactical officer stared at his screen in disbelief. Hundreds of incoming projectiles were detected. This was impossible. No one fired this many missiles at once. He screamed a warning to Admiral Kreth. The Admiral's eyes went wide with shock. Kreth shouted orders desperately. Activate all point defense weapons. Shoot down those missiles. Fire everything. The Krath ship automated defense systems opened fire immediately. Laser beams and small railguns tried to intercept the incoming missiles. Many missiles were destroyed. But there were simply too many. Dozens of missiles punched through the defensive screen. They slammed into the flagship shields with tremendous force. The shields held against the first wave. Energy barriers absorbed the explosions. But then the second wave arrived. These missiles were different. They were designed specifically to overload shield generators. The shield disruptors did their job perfectly. The flagship shields flickered once, twice, then died completely. The ship hull was now exposed and vulnerable. The third wave of missiles hit bare armor. Explosions tore through the outer hull. Compartments were breached. Atmosphere vented into space. Crew members died in the blasts. The tactical officer reported shield failure in a panicked voice. Multiple hull breaches on decks 3 through 7. Fire suppression systems were failing. Casualties were mounting. Admiral Kreth could not believe this was happening. How could these unknown ships be so effective? Jake watched his tactical display with grim satisfaction. The first strike had worked exactly as planned. The Krath flagship was damaged and vulnerable. Now it was time to finish this. He ordered Daniel to target the enemy command deck with railguns. The main weapons would end this quickly. The Valiant Dawn railguns charged and fired. These were massive magnetic accelerators. They used powerful electromagnets to launch solid metal slugs at incredible velocities. The projectiles moved faster than any energy beam. They hit harder than any missile, and they were almost impossible to stop. The heavy slugs tore through the Krath flagship like it was made of paper. Armor plating crumpled and shattered. The slugs punched through corridor after corridor. They destroyed equipment and structure as they went. One slug hit directly where the command deck was located. Admiral Kreth had just enough time to realize his mistake. These were not merchants or local defenders. These were professional warships with deadly weapons. He tried to speak, to give orders, but the railgun slug arrived first. The command deck exploded in fire and debris. Admiral Kreth and his senior staff died instantly. The Krath flagship, its command structure completely destroyed, began tumbling out of control. Emergency systems tried to compensate, but there was no one alive to give orders. The great warship that had terrorized the Valon was now just a floating wreck. The other Krath ships watched their flagship die in horror. Suddenly, they had no admiral. No one was giving orders. The fleet coordination fell apart completely. Some captains tried to retreat. Others attempted to form a new defensive formation. A few continued firing at the planet in a desperate attempt to maintain their mission. Victor Grant's voice came through the fleet channel. 3 Krath ships were breaking formation and trying to run. They were heading for the jump point at the system edge. Victor asked if they should pursue. Jake made a quick decision. Let them go. Those ships were no longer a threat. Focus on the ships still attacking the planet. Rachel Kim reported from the Storm Chaser. Her ship and the Silent Fury had disabled 4 escort vessels already. They were pursuing 2 more ships that were trying to use the planet gravity well for evasive maneuvers. Jake told them to maintain pursuit but be careful. They should not damage any Valon orbital facilities or satellites. Over the next 2 hours, the human fleet systematically eliminated the Krath blockade. The battle was completely one-sided. Some Krath ships tried to surrender. Their captains transmitted pleas for mercy. Jake accepted their surrenders and ordered those ships to power down weapons and stay in place. Other Krath ships tried to fight. They fired their energy weapons at the human vessels. But human shields and armor were designed to withstand damage. The Krath beams splashed harmlessly against the Valiant Dawn hull. Human return fire was devastating. Railgun slugs and missiles tore the enemy ships apart. Some Krath captains chose to run rather than fight or surrender. They activated their jump drives and fled the system. Jake let them go. His mission was to save the Valon, not to chase down every enemy ship. Besides, those ships would carry a message back to Krath space. They would tell their leaders what happened when they attacked human allies. Finally, the last Krath vessel was either destroyed, captured, or fled. The Valon system was free. The orbital bombardment had stopped. Jake ordered all ships to cease fire. The battle was over. They had won a complete victory. Amy worked her communications console. She was trying to establish contact with the Valon planetary government. It took several minutes because many communication networks were damaged by the bombardment. Finally, she made contact with someone from the Planetary Defense Force. They were requesting permission to send a delegation to the Valiant Dawn. Jake immediately granted permission. He told Amy to prepare a shuttle bay to receive Valon visitors. He also instructed the crew to treat their guests with respect and kindness. These people had been through terrible trauma. They needed to feel safe and welcome. Jake looked around his bridge. His crew looked tired but triumphant. They had done what they came to do. The Valon were saved. Human strength had been used for a righteous purpose. This was a good day. Now they would meet their allies and begin the work of helping them rebuild. An hour later, Jake stood in the shuttle bay waiting. The bay was a large open space with heavy doors that opened to space. A small Valon transport craft was approaching. It docked carefully with the Valiant Dawn. The airlock cycled through its safety procedures. Then the inner door opened. 4 Valon emerged from the transport. They were beautiful beings. They stood about 5 feet tall. Their skin was iridescent, shifting colors between blue and green as they moved. They had large expressive eyes and moved with flowing grace. Despite their elegance, they looked exhausted and traumatized. The leader of the delegation stepped forward. She introduced herself as Ambassador Lyra. Her voice was musical but trembled with emotion. Tears ran down her face. She approached Jake slowly as if she could not believe he was real. Ambassador Lyra spoke to Jake in perfect galactic standard. She said she could not believe humans had come. The Valon sent their distress call hoping anyone would hear. They never dreamed it would be humanity who answered. They never expected anyone to arrive in time. But the humans came anyway. They saved the Valon people from destruction. Jake felt a lump form in his throat. He told the ambassador that her people showed humans kindness when humanity was new to the galaxy. The Valon were the first aliens to treat humans as friends rather than threats. Humans did not forget their friends. When friends called for help, humans answered. Lyra reached out and took Jake's hands in her own smaller ones. Her hands felt warm and soft. She told him the Krath had killed millions of Valon. They destroyed 4 colony worlds completely. The main world was being bombed from orbit. Everyone thought they were going to lose everything. But then the Deathworlders arrived. The humans came and saved them. One of the other Valon stepped forward. He wore a military uniform. He introduced himself as Commander Zephyr of the Valon Defense Fleet. He said he had to confess something. The Valon were terrified when they saw human ships arrive. Stories about human combat capabilities were well known. Stories about Earth being a death world frightened many species. But watching the humans fight was incredible. The efficiency and power were beyond anything Commander Zephyr imagined. The Krath fleet was destroyed in just 2 hours. Ships that had terrorized the Valon for weeks were gone. It was like watching natural forces at work. Unstoppable, overwhelming. Jake nodded with understanding. He knew human military methods seemed brutal to peaceful species. But he wanted Commander Zephyr to understand something important. Humans did not come here to demonstrate their strength or to intimidate anyone. They came to help friends in need. That was the only reason that mattered. Jake led the Valon delegation to the briefing room. His senior officers were waiting there. The Valon brought detailed reports about the damage the Krath invasion caused. The information was devastating. Ambassador Lyra explained the full scope of the disaster with a heavy voice. 4 colony worlds were completely destroyed. The Krath used orbital weapons to wipe out all settlements. Over 3 million people were dead. Another million were displaced, meaning they lost their homes and had nowhere to go. The agricultural production system was crippled. Trade networks were in ruins. The Valon economy was destroyed. Daniel studied the data carefully. He asked what the Krath goal was. Were they after resources? Did they want territory? What was their reason for this terrible attack? These were important questions to understand the enemy motivation. Commander Zephyr answered. The Krath Dominion believed in expansion through conquest. They wanted to make the Valon a client state. This meant the Valon would lose their independence. The Krath would control Valon trade routes and steal Valon resources. When the Valon government refused, the Krath decided to break them through force. Amy asked the obvious question. What would stop the Krath from coming back with more ships? The victory today was decisive, but the Krath Dominion was a large empire. They had many more vessels. They could assemble a bigger fleet and try again. Lyra and Zephyr exchanged worried glances. The truth was, nothing could stop the Krath from returning. The Valon had no real military capability. They were traders and scientists, not warriors. Before this invasion, the Valon believed diplomacy and reason could solve any conflict. Now they knew better. Some species only understood force. Jake sat back in his chair and thought about the problem. The solution seemed obvious to him. Humans needed to make it clear that attacking the Valon meant facing humanity. The Krath needed to understand there would be consequences for aggression against human allies. Jake explained his idea to Ambassador Lyra. He would recommend to Fleet Command that humans establish a permanent Military presence in the Valon system, not an occupation force, not conquerors. A protection force. The Valon would keep their sovereignty and independence. But human warships would be stationed here. Any aggressor would have to fight through the human fleet. Lyra's eyes grew wide with surprise. She asked if humanity would really do that. Station ships permanently in Valon space. Keep a garrison here to protect them. It seemed too generous, too kind. Why would humans commit so many resources for the Valon? Jake gave a simple answer. Friends protect friends. That was the human way. The Valon helped humanity when humans needed guidance. Now humanity would help the Valon when they needed protection. This was what true friendship meant. The meeting continued for several more hours. They discussed rebuilding efforts. The Valon needed help repairing damaged infrastructure. They needed food supplies because farms were destroyed. They needed medical aid for the wounded. Jake promised that humanity would provide assistance. Earth had resources and was willing to share. 3 days later, Jake stood before a powerful communication array. Admiral Brooks had approved his plan to station ships permanently in Valon space, but she suggested something more. Humanity should send a message to the entire galaxy. Let every species know where humanity stood. Make it clear what would happen to those who attacked human allies. The message would broadcast on all major galactic communication channels. Every government would receive it. Every military would hear it. Every species would understand. Jake prepared what he wanted to say. This was an important moment. The words needed to be strong and clear. Jake began his message. He identified himself as Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran warship Valiant Dawn. He spoke on behalf of the United Earth government and its military forces. His voice was calm but firm. He explained that 3 weeks ago humans received a distress signal from the Valon Republic. The Valon were under attack by the Krath Dominion. They faced orbital bombardment and possible genocide. They called for help. Humanity answered that call. Jake talked about Earth being a Class 12 death world. Humans evolved fighting for survival. They learned to be strong and fierce. They learned never to surrender. Some species in the galaxy feared humans for this. Some called humans barbaric or primitive or dangerous. But the Valon never saw humans that way. When humans first entered galactic space, the Valon welcomed them. They taught humans about galactic customs. They helped humans navigate complex politics. They treated humans as equals. They became true friends. So when the Valon called for help, humans came. They brought their death world strength. They brought their human determination. They brought their warships. They drove the Krath from Valon space. They made it clear that aggression against friends would not be tolerated. This was humanity declaration. Humans stood with their allies. Any species that threatened those under human protection would face the full might of the Terran fleet. Humans were not conquerors. They were not empire builders. But they were fierce defenders of those they called friends. To the Krath Dominion and other aggressive empires, this was a warning. The Deathworlders had declared war on tyranny. Anyone who tested this resolve would regret it. To the peaceful species of the galaxy, humanity offered friendship. Humans understood the value of civilization and peace and cooperation. They would gladly be allies. Jake ended his message with simple words. This is who we are. This is what we stand for. Remember it. The transmission ended. The message began spreading across the galaxy at the speed of light. Soon every species would hear it. The Deathworlders had spoken. Jake's message spread across the galaxy like a wave. On dozens of worlds and hundreds of governments, the response was immediate. The message created strong reactions everywhere. Some species felt hope, others felt fear. Many felt both at the same time. In the Galactic Council chambers, representatives from 100 species gathered for an emergency meeting. The debate was intense and emotional. Everyone had opinions about what humanity had done. The large chamber echoed with many voices speaking at once. Councillor Thane of the Rigelian Compact spoke first. He was angry. He said this was outrageous. Humanity declared itself protector of the galaxy without permission. Who gave them that authority? No one elected humans to be galactic police. This was dangerous. Ambassador Lyra had been granted a special seat at the council for this meeting. She stood up to respond. Her voice was firm despite her small size. She pointed out that humanity did not claim authority over anyone. They offered protection to their friends. Her people were dying. Their worlds were burning. Where was the Galactic Council during the invasion? The council had debated while the Valon suffered. They talked about sanctions and diplomatic pressure while millions died. The humans took action. They stopped talking and started helping. That was the difference. Actions mattered more than words. Another counselor stood up. This one represented a species that suffered under Krath aggression years ago. They supported human action completely. For too long, the galaxy allowed bullies like the Krath to terrorize smaller species. Everyone was afraid of the cost of intervention. Humanity showed what was possible when someone had courage. The debate continued for many hours. Arguments went back and forth. But gradually, a consensus started forming. Some species had concerns about human military power. That was natural. But no one could deny that humans saved the Valon. And in doing so, they sent a message that resonated with every peaceful species living in fear. In the weeks following the battle, something remarkable began happening. Other species reached out to humanity. They requested defensive agreements and mutual aid treaties. Governments that never contacted Earth before were now sending diplomatic missions. Everyone wanted human protection. Jake found himself hosting delegations from many different civilizations. Admiral Brooks appointed him as the primary contact for these negotiations. He met with representatives from species he never heard of before. Each one had a similar story. They were peaceful people facing threats from aggressive neighbors. One meeting involved the Crystalline Confederation. These were beings made of living silicon instead of carbon. They grew in caves of crystal and thought in ways humans barely understood. Their representative voice sounded like wind chimes. It was beautiful and strange. The crystalline representative explained their problem. They were not warriors. Their species never knew violence. They evolved in a safe environment. But now pirates were raiding their worlds. The pirates stole resources and hurt innocent people. The crystalline had no way to defend themselves. They asked for human help. Jake listened carefully to everything they said. He wanted to make something clear before agreeing. Humans were not mercenaries. They did not fight for money. They were not looking to build an empire. If humans agreed to protect the crystalline, it would be because of shared values. He needed to understand what the crystalline civilization stood for. The crystalline representative talked about their culture. They valued peace above all else. They created beautiful art from living crystal. They contributed scientific discoveries to galactic knowledge. They believed all life was precious. They harmed no one. By the end of the conversation, Jake knew these were good people worth protecting. Jake agreed to help them. But in return, humans asked for something. The crystalline should share their knowledge. Help humans understand the galaxy better. Stand with humans when threats required more than military strength. The crystalline agreed eagerly. This seemed more than fair. Similar conversations happened with many other species. A pattern emerged clearly. Humanity offered military protection. In exchange, they received knowledge, resources, and genuine friendship. These were new kinds of alliances. They were built on mutual respect rather than dominance or fear. The Krath Dominion eventually responded to their defeat. Their leader was called Overlord Kraxus. No one knew what he looked like. He ruled from a hidden palace, but his message was broadcast widely. He wanted everyone to hear. Overlord Kraxus said the Krath Dominion did not recognize humanity claimed to protect lesser species. Krath expansion was ordained by their strength. They had the right as the superior civilization. They would not be deterred by primitive Deathworlders. The empire would continue growing. The message was full of typical Krath arrogance. But Jake noticed something interesting. Despite the tough talk, the Krath had not sent another fleet to Valon space. They had not attacked any world under human protection. The message was just words. A way to save face after a humiliating defeat. Admiral Brooks called a strategy meeting to discuss the Krath response. She gathered all the senior captains together. They met via video link. Brooks said the Krath were testing humanity. They wanted to see if humans were serious about defending allies. The next attack would come somewhere humans might not expect. Jake recommended establishing rapid response fleets. Human warships should be positioned at strategic locations throughout the region. If the Krath moved against any ally, humans needed to respond within hours, not weeks. Speed was essential. Admiral Brooks approved the plan. But she reminded Jake that humans could not be everywhere at once. They needed to be smart about resource allocation. They needed allies to help watch and report threats. Intelligence was as important as firepower. 6 months passed. The galaxy changed dramatically during that time. Humanity established defensive pacts with 23 different species. The Terran fleet grew larger. New ships were commissioned at record speed. Shipyards worked around the clock. Human military power expanded rapidly. Jake stood in the observation lounge of the Valiant Dawn. The ship was now permanently stationed in Valon space. The system had become a busy hub. Ships from dozens of species came and went constantly. Valon Prime was recovering. Cities were being rebuilt. People were returning to normal lives. Ambassador Lyra joined Jake at the window. She brought 2 glasses of Valon crystal wine. The liquid glowed softly with inner light. It tasted sweet and slightly fizzy. Lyra raised her glass in a toast. To friendship, she said simply. Jake raised his own glass. To friendship, he echoed. They clinked glasses together and drank. The wine was delicious. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching ships move through space outside the window. Lyra spoke softly. She said when humans first arrived, the Valon were terrified. Stories about Deathworlds made humans seem like monsters. Tales of human capacity for violence were frightening. But humans were not monsters at all. They were protectors. They were heroes. Jake smiled at her words. He said humans were just people. Yes, they had capacity for violence. Earth taught them to be strong and fierce, but Earth also taught them other things. The value of working together. The importance of protecting those who could not protect themselves. Strength without compassion was just cruelty. Lyra nodded in agreement. She said the galaxy was safer because of humanity. The Krath had not attacked anyone in months. Pirates were fleeing to the outer rim regions. Species that once lived in constant fear were now building and growing. Children could play without worry. That was the gift humans gave. Jake said that was all humans ever wanted, to make a positive difference. To prove that strength did not have to mean tyranny. That power could be used for good. The Deathworlders could be more than just warriors. They could be guardians. On Earth, a new generation of officers was being trained. The Battle of Valon Prime had become legendary. It was taught in every military academy. Young cadets studied the tactics Jake and his fellow captains used. But they also learned something more important. They learned why humans fought. The academies taught principles along with tactics. Human military intervention should follow clear rules. Only help those who asked for it. Never conquer or dominate. Protect the innocent. Fight tyranny. Show mercy when possible. Be fierce when necessary. These principles would guide humanity's future actions in the galaxy. Young Lieutenant Sophie Grant graduated top of her class. She was assigned to the Valiant Dawn as part of her training. Sophie was the daughter of Captain Victor Grant. She had her father determination and her mother intelligence. Jake met with her when she came aboard. Jake welcomed Sophie to his ship. He said her father spoke highly of her abilities. Sophie thanked him. She said she hoped to live up to her father's legacy and Jake's legacy. She wanted to make them proud. Jake gave her advice. He told her not to worry about legacies. Focus on doing what is right in each moment. Make decisions based on principles, not glory. Take care of the people under your command. The rest will take care of itself. Sophie listened carefully and took his words to heart. 1 year after the Battle of Valon Prime, major changes came for Jake Morrison. He was promoted to Admiral. Fleet Command gave him responsibility for the entire Outer Spiral Defense Fleet. This was a huge honor but also a big challenge. It meant leaving the Valiant Dawn behind. Jake felt mixed emotions about the promotion. He was proud to be trusted with such responsibility. But he would miss his ship and crew. The Valiant Dawn had been his home for 5 years. The crew were like family. Leaving them hurt his heart. On his last day aboard, Jake walked through every corridor. He visited every section. He thanked every crew member personally. In the engineering bay, Marcus gave him a firm handshake. In the medical bay, Lisa hugged him. In the armory, Kevin saluted with tears in his eyes. These were good people. Jake would never forget them. Jake moved to Fleet Command headquarters on Earth. His new office had a massive display showing the entire Outer Spiral region. Hundreds of star systems were marked. Human ships patrolled dozens of sectors. Allied worlds were highlighted in blue. Threat zones showed in red. The scope was overwhelming. But as Jake looked at the strategic display, he felt profound accomplishment. The galaxy was different now. Better. Safer. The Krath Dominion had collapsed 6 months earlier. Their empire fragmented after several major defeats. Human-led coalitions liberated world after world. Former subject species were now free. Many of those freed species joined the growing alliance of peaceful civilizations. They contributed their own strengths to collective defense. Some provided intelligence networks. Others offered manufacturing capacity. Still others shared scientific knowledge. The alliance was stronger because of diversity. Piracy rates dropped to all-time lows. Criminal organizations could not operate freely anymore. Human warships and allied patrol craft made space lanes safe. Merchant ships traveled without fear. Trade flourished as never before. Economic prosperity spread across the region. Species that once viewed each other with suspicion now worked together cooperatively. They were inspired by humanity's example. Humans showed that strength could be tempered with compassion. Power could be used for protection rather than domination. This changed how many species thought about military force. The Galactic Council officially recognized humanity as a guarantor of peace. This was a formal title with real meaning. It acknowledged the Terran fleet role in maintaining stability. Earth received a permanent seat on the Council. Human representatives helped make decisions affecting the entire galaxy. But Jake knew the work was never truly finished. There would always be new threats, always new challenges, always species in need of help. Peace required constant vigilance. Freedom needed eternal defenders. This was the burden humans chose to carry. Admiral Patricia Brooks visited Jake in his new office. She looked around at the displays and equipment with approval. Then she turned to Jake with a knowing smile. She said he had changed the galaxy. She wanted to know how that felt. Jake thought about the question for a long moment. So much had happened in 1 year. So many lives saved. So many worlds protected. He tried to find words to express what he felt. Finally he spoke. It felt like humanity found its purpose. Humans came from a death world. They evolved to be fierce and strong. But that strength was always meant for something greater than just survival. It was meant for protection. To stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. To be shields rather than swords. Admiral Brooks nodded thoughtfully. She said the Deathworlders became peacekeepers. That was quite a transformation. Not bad for a species that was called barbaric just 20 years ago. Humans proved everyone wrong about what strength meant. Jake smiled slightly. He said humans were still barbaric when necessary. They could still be fierce and terrible in battle. But now the galaxy understood humans were barbaric for the right reasons. Violence in service of justice was different from violence in service of tyranny. Admiral Brooks stayed for another hour. They discussed future plans and potential threats. Intelligence suggested some aggressive species in distant regions might test human resolve. Brooks wanted Jake to develop contingency plans. Be ready for anything. After Brooks left, Jake stood at his office window. Night was falling over Earth. He looked up at the stars appearing in the darkening sky. Out there, human ships patrolled dozens of systems. They protected hundreds of billions of lives. The Velon were rebuilding their colonies. The Crystalline Confederation was flourishing. Countless other species slept safely. It all started with a simple distress call. A desperate plea from friends who needed help. The Velon sent their SOS hoping anyone would answer. Humanity heard that call and responded with everything they had. 4 ships jumped across the galaxy. 2,000 crew members risked their lives. All because friends were in danger. That single act of courage and compassion changed everything. It showed the galaxy what humanity stood for. It proved that Deathworlders could be heroes. It demonstrated that strength without kindness was just brutality. But strength combined with compassion was heroism. The human fleet declared war on tyranny that day. They made it clear that aggression against peaceful species would not be tolerated. Bullies would face consequences. The weak would be defended. Justice would be upheld. This was the promise humanity made to the galaxy, and in keeping that promise, humans brought peace to countless worlds. Pirates fled in fear. Aggressive empires collapsed. Trade routes reopened. Families reunited. Children grew up without knowing war. This was the legacy of that one battle at Velon Prime. Jake thought about all the people who made this possible. Captain Victor Grant and his aggressive tactics. Captain Rachel Kim and her brilliant strategies. Captain Alex Turner and his unconventional methods. Admiral Brooks and her unwavering support. Every crew member on every ship who did their duty. But most of all, Jake thought about the Velon. Ambassador Lyra and Commander Zephyr and all their people. They trusted humanity when others feared humans. They called for help believing someone would answer. Their faith was rewarded. That trust became the foundation of something beautiful. Jake made a decision. Tomorrow he would visit Valon Prime. He wanted to see how the reconstruction was progressing. He wanted to walk through the rebuilt cities. He wanted to see children playing in parks. He wanted to remember why all this effort mattered, because in the end it was not about military victories or strategic advantages. It was not about showing strength or intimidating enemies. It was about people. Real people living real lives. Families raising children, artists creating beauty. Scientists discovering truth. Merchants conducting trade. Simple people living in peace. That was what humans fought to protect. Not abstract concepts or political ideals. Real people who deserved to live without fear. That was the true meaning of being a Deathworlder. Using the strength Earth gave them to make the galaxy safer for everyone. Jake turned away from the window. He sat at his desk and began reviewing reports. There was always work to do. Always threats to monitor. Always allies to support. The job of protecting the galaxy never ended. But Jake did not mind. This was his purpose. This was what he was meant to do. Far away in Valon space, Ambassador Lyra looked up at the night sky. She could see a human warship orbiting her world. The ship lights twinkled like a guardian star. She felt safe knowing humans watched over her people. She whispered a quiet thank you to the stars. On the valiant dawn, the new captain walked the bridge. She was young but capable. The crew respected her. She looked at the stars and thought about her responsibility. She would honor the legacy Jake Morrison left behind. She would protect those who needed protection. She would be worthy of her ship. Throughout the galaxy, millions of beings lived their lives in peace. They did not know the names of the humans who protected them. They did not understand the constant vigilance required. But they benefited from it every day. Their safety was purchased with human dedication and sacrifice. The Deathworlders fleet had declared war after aliens sent an SOS. That declaration echoed across space and time. It became a promise kept, a covenant honored, a friendship treasured, and in the keeping of that promise, humanity found its place among the stars. Not as conquerors, not as overlords, but as guardians, as protectors, as friends. The galaxy was better because humans chose to answer when someone called for help. That choice defined who humanity was, and it shaped what the galaxy would become. The story that began with a distress signal continued every day. New chapters were written with each patrol, each rescue, each stand against tyranny. The Deathworlders brought peace through strength, and they proved that the fiercest warriors could also be the gentlest guardians. This was the legacy. This was the promise. This was the future humanity built among the stars.